Welcome to the next section where we're looking at one of my favorite components inside of Ozone 7, and that is the Imager. So this is actually a cool plugin for a few reasons. It has a couple great metering options. It has a polar sample, polar level, and I cannot say that word, Lisage, I don't know. But basically they're very cool metering options to let you know what or how much of a stereo image you have and your phase correlation. So you guys see this in my tutorial videos all the time. I usually use Logic stock one. I have it up on the right to compare. But basically Ozone 7's Imager is a multi-band imager. So if we load up another imaging plugin, let's load up a freeware one, Flux Stereo Tool. You will see if we load it once it comes up that it has similar functions. So let's turn off Ozone. You have width.
Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now
Alright, so now the mix is quite wide.
Looking in the mirror, who I see.
But you can see that this is affecting the entire frequency spectrum. So as all things Ozone goes way deeper. That's just what it does. And I love it and I love that you can load this up now on individual tracks, which is awesome. So it's basically a multi-band stereo imager. So for instance, you don't really want the width of your low end to be that wide, right? So you can actually make it very center focused. So at a value of 0, it's going to be where you had it in your mix. So when you go down to -100, it narrows it. It's going to get it more centered, if that makes sense. So see that? It's literally perfect center now. So I actually play around with this at about -50 because in this track, I believe I left one of the basses in stereo, which is kind of a no-no, but all right, so then you can actually move these bands around just like you can in all the other multi-band, like the Dynamics module or the EQ. So you can actually solo them independently. So let's listen to this low mid. I'm going to leave that stereo. Let's listen to this high one, or the mid-high.
Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me.
I'm going to spread that up to quite a wide width.
Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. Looking in the mirror, who I see.
Alright, so I was just playing around with it so you could hear it. Basically what I've just done is I basically was like, okay, I have a bass that's maybe a little bit too stereo sounding. Let's get that more right up the middle, solo. It's pretty much right up the middle, a little bit of stereo. If I go straight 100, it's pretty much straight mono. Now this low mid didn't even touch. I probably could narrow it a little. And then the reason why you don't want to have every frequency band just really spread out is you're going to make the mix is going to get all this weird nasty phase, and you're going to have a bad phase correlation. So on this meter, you want to be closer to +1. If you're at 0, you're at true stereo. If you're at -1, your mix sounds bad. So you want this to bob around. You want that to bob around +1. So it's super wide, which is nice. All right, and these band widths here, this is going to tell how wide or how narrow it gets. That's pretty self-explanatory. And this is totally dependent on your mix, on the genre that you're in, and how wide of a mix you want in general.
Here I am, happy in my own skin. After all my lessons I learned to win. Now or never's what I'm living in. Feathers on my arms, I'm flying high. Painting myself a brand new sky. Lost my shadow in the glowing light. I walk through the fire.
Alright, so usually what you'll see with most of the presets, you'll see not a whole lot of width on the two low bands. maybe on certain genres of dubstep you will, because the low mids or the these it's the second band here. Sometimes those big basses in the drop you want width to, but for the most part, I say it's fairly safe to say that you'll have more width on the top two bands. And the really cool feature is this Stereoize slider. Let's listen to this real quick.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. 1,000 mistakes spelling out the truth. Truth is then I got looking.
All right, so as you can hear, it adds this stereo effect. It really creates this three-dimensional width. It gets it outside of the left and right speakers. And I will say that I just boosted these values up to 100 in the bandwidth, which is going to be full stereo, which would be a lot with this off.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me.
But it's still mono compatible, which blows my mind, meaning that it is still not completely stereo sounding.
Looking in the mirror of who I see.
That blows my mind, because if you did that same thing with, let's load up that Flux plugin again, the stereo tool, and we'll look at the multimeter in Logic as we do this. If I do full width on this,
looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free.
you can see that it just destroys your phase on the phase correlation. You get to the anti-phase part of it, which is no good. So this Stereoizer effect is a very powerful tool. You can use it in moderation in conjunction with using these bandwidth stereo width tools on each frequency in moderation. You can really widen your mix and still have it be mono compatible.
Looking in the mirror of who I looking in the mirror of who I see.
That sounds great in terms of stereo width. And you can see over here on the phase meter, we already touched on this, but +1 means it's mono, 0 means stereo, -1 means it's awful.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. 1,000 mistakes spelling out the truth. Truth is then I got. Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the
All right, let's talk about these different views. This first one is in the vector scope. You have the polar sample that's taking little samples by plotting little dots. So it's a very finite way of it takes very little bits of information of the audio, which is pretty cool. The polar level is a little bit different. Usually this type of meter is described as the energy.
looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me.
So you can kind of think of what the consistent lines are inside the middle
Looking in the mirror of who I see.
as RMS values almost. It's more of the consistent average level of the sound as opposed to these polar samples. They fade in and out quickly, right?
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. 1,000 mistakes spelling out the truth. Truth is then I got. Looking in.
All right, and then we have this Lasaus. I don't know how it's properly pronounced, but this is one of my favorite ones for me.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real.
Because you get to see left and right balance as well. And it's just a good way of seeing how much mono content you have and how much stereo content, both left and right, you have. So that's really the main tool here. You have these different metering or viewing options up at the top, which are pretty similar to some of the other controls in some of the other modules. So you have the first view is the main view. It's going to have the crossover view. The reason it's called the crossover view is it has the different frequencies. Then you have under it, you have the stereo width spectrum.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. 1,000.
So this is showing a mirrored spectrum display of the signal of the stereo width in your track, which is pretty cool. Then under that, you have the correlation trace. Now this is going to be kind of like an ongoing history of a correlation meter.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains.
So it's kind of a graph. By kind of a graph it's definitely a graph. I don't know why I said kind of, but -1, anything down here would be really nasty and out of phase. and then anything above here is plus 1, and you can see the dips in the audio and see how consistent it is, which is kind of cool.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free.
All right, so we'll look at this when we're actually going to be mastering some tracks, going through a couple tracks at the end of the tutorial course. But I love this part of the of Ozone 7. It's a great tool. It's a great thing to use on individual instruments in the mix. If you need to widen some mono tracks or add some stereo width, some sounds, it is a great tool to do it. All right, I'll see you in the next video where we are looking at the Exciter.